Hi, in this video I'm going to explain Microsoft .NET Forms, the properties, and the events that they trigger. Here is the overview of the video. First, I'm going to talk about the Modeless and Modal show methods of uh, .NET Forms. Then I will talk about the owned-owner relationships that can exist between two separate forms. And then I'll talk about all the events that will be triggered during the lifetime of a form. And finally, I'll talk about different types of form notifications. Let's begin by defining a form. Any class derived from system.windows.forms.form class is referred to as a form, as a .NET form. The form can be shown either modelessly or modally. If you want to do it in a modeless fashion, which means the application main thread can preempt the UI thread when the form is shown, you can use form.show. This is good when you want to open a form and you want to switch between the open form and other forms in the same application without any issue. However, sometimes you want the thread showing the form to be non-preemptive. In those situations, you use form.showDialog. That shows the form in a modal fashion. What does that mean? That means when the form is shown using showDialog, you cannot switch to other forms in the same application until you close the current form. Please note that when you use the showDialog method to show a new form, you're creating an implicit owner-owned relationship. So here's the situation. Let's say within this form, the owner form, I click on a button and that button pops up this form. So this form is shown. Let's say in order to show this form, I have used the showDialog method. So this form is being shown in a modal fashion. So I cannot switch back and forth between the owner and owned while the owned is open because this is shown in a modal fashion. Now, at this time, as you see, this owned form is darker. The border of this owned form is darker and is bold, and the owner is lighter. That means the owner is inactive and the owned is active, right? So whatever, let's say, mouse click you do or whatever key you enter on the keyboard will be given to this own form, right? That's what the definition of an active form means, right? You're not allowed to click on anything else other than the on form. If you do that, it doesn't work. And this owner relationship ensures that the own form is on top of is shown on top of the owner form. So as you see, we have an overlap between the owned and owner, but the application always shows the own form on top because you will not have access to the owner until the time that you close the own using, let's say, this close button, right? Now let's discuss in detail how the own form affects the behavior of the owner form when we are using showDialog to show a form. The owner form cannot be minimized, maximized, or even moved. Why? Because it's inactive and there's an own form that is active and is shown modally. The own form blocks mouse and keyboard input to the owner form. So as I said, you cannot access the owner using keyboard or mouse. The owner form is minimized when the owned form is minimized. So when you minimize owned, owner will be automatically minimized as well. And you can only close the owned form not the owner form, while the own form is shown. And if both owner and owned forms are minimized, and if the user presses Alt and Tab to switch to the owned or owner form, uh, you're never going to jump to the owner. You always end up at the owned. So the owned form is activated using Alt Tab. Now that we know how the form shown modally behaves, let's compare it with the forms that are shown modelessly using the show method. The call to the show method does not create any implicit owner-owned relationship between the two forms, between the parent and child form. That means you can activate any form that you want without any problem, and also you can minimize each form separately, maximize each form separately, move each form separately. If the user closes any form except the main form, the most recently active form gets reactivated. So you can basically interact with any form that you want. You don't need to close the uh, recently opened or the most recently opened form before interacting with the other forms. You can interact with any form that you want because they are opened or they are shown in a modeless fashion. However, in some cases, even after showing a form modelessly, the user wants to create an owner-owned relationship between the newly generated form and the parent form. That's possible. All you need to do is to set the owner property of the form, the parent form, and say, I'm sorry, the child form, and say form.owner is equal to this, where form is the own form. Instead of setting the owner of a form after it is shown using the show method, uh, you can basically pass the owner of the form to the show method. For example, I want to say, let's have a new form of type owned form, and let's show that form in a way that the form is owned by its owner, which is this form, right? Whatever this form is. This form is the form that contains the button that has this button click event handler. Now, it is possible for a form to contain or to own multiple forms. So an owner form can have a enumerator over the list of forms that it owns. All it needs to do is it has to access its own forms collection. And this is how you can enumerate over a collection in C#. You can say for each form owned form in this dot owned forms, that's basically the property of a form that collects all the owned forms. And then you can basically access every single form that the current form owns, or any form that this form owns, and then do whatever you want. For example, in this case, we are showing a message box with the text of every single owned form for this form. The next topic I'm going to cover in this lecture is the form lifetime and all the events that will be triggered during the lifetime of a form. From the time that you call the constructor of a form, the form gets constructed, all the way to the time that the form gets deconstructed and gets deleted in the memory, we have multiple events that will be triggered. The first one is load. that's when the form is loaded into memory, and then it gets activated, but it's not shown yet. So activated is before shown. After that, you will see the form on the screen. That's when it's shown. The shown event is triggered, and while it's shown, it can get activated or deactivated multiple times. So when it's shown at the very beginning, it's activated, but it can get deactivated if, let's say, the form is shown in a modeless fashion and you're basically trying to interact with another form in the same application as a user of the application. So in this situation, you're just deactivating it. Or let's say this is the main form and you're minimizing it. That's another deactivation event, right? Basically, if you're, let's say, um, using an application and then you minimize it, you're deactivating its form, right? But when you restoring the window, you're basically activating it again. So there would be a possibility of many alternative sequence of deactivate, activate, deactivate, activated uh, events during the lifetime of form, and at some point the user wants to close the form. When you want to close the form, let's say you either click on the close button on the top right corner or using any other approach, uh, uh, you're getting into a sequence of three final events. One of them is called form closing. This is the last chance for the programmer to abort the closing process. For example, let's say you're writing a program uh, that plays a game, and if the user of the game tries to close the form at the middle of the game, in the form closing event handler, you can basically ask the user, are you sure you want to close it? And then if the user says no, don't close it, we can abort the closing process and get back to the activated mode of the form. Um, but if the user confirms that they want to close, then we're going to go from form closing event to the form closed event. And form closed event is when the form is not shown anymore, and then after that the form gets deactivated for the very last time. Any of the events that I showed you in the previous slide can be easily handled using an event handler, and you will definitely do this a lot uh, in the future. Um, but I'm going to focus on the most interesting event and handling that event, and that's called the form closing event. The reason I find this event and handling it interesting is because when you close a form, it is possible that an application could, prematurely end processing and potentially leave data in an inconsistent state. As I mentioned, you may have a game and you're playing the game, and at the middle of the game, you unintentionally hit the close button. So you definitely want to give the user or the gamer a chance to abort the closing process. So this is an example of a form closing event handler that you see we can write for any form. This event handler basically gets a sender just like any other event handler and an event arcs like E. This one has a more specific event arc called form closing event arc. So what we can do is when the user wants to close a form, we can open a message box or show a message box um, with the following message saying that abort game, abort your game, question mark. Game in progress is basically the caption of the message box. And then you basically have the message box button yes or no. If the user decide to click on no, that means let's not abort the game. Uh, then the dialog result will be no. Dialog result is what uh, the result would be what will be returned by the show method of the message box. And if the result is equal to dialog result.no, then we're gonna set the cancel property of form closing event arg equal to true. When the cancel property of form closing event arg is true, the form automatically aborts the closing process and your form will not get closed, right? You will still have the chance to play your game. But if the user confirms that yes, I'm gonna abort the game, then this is gonna be false, and you're setting e.cancel to false, so it's not going to prevent the form from getting closed, and the closing process will continue. Some applications like games are very user input intensive, and some applications like calendar or email are not. They can run in the background, they can continue being executed in the background. They don't need to get the attention of user every second that they are running. They can be in the background, and whenever they need to get the attention of the user, they can create a notification. The notification can be very non-invasive, or it can be very urgent and invasive. I'm going to show you in the next few slides how to use Microsoft Forms to create a notification. The most non-invasive form of notification is to call the activate method of the form. Basically, this activate causes the inactive forms border and taskbar button to flash 3 times. Or in some operating systems, maybe it's a little bit different. And the purpose of this flash is to grab the user's attention. That's a very mild way of notifying user of an event. Now, if you want to have a bit more invasive form notification, you can use form.notifyIcon class. And in this class, there's a method called showBalloonTip. And the showBalloonTip gets an integer, and that integer specifies the number of milliseconds that you wish your notification appears and lasts in the right bottom corner of the screen, so that the user can see it, right? The notification appears with a sound, and also you can change its title using notify icon.balloon-tip title. You can edit this to whatever you want. You can also set the notify icon.balloon-tip text property, and you can select the balloon tip icon from one of the 3 choices that exist, either info, warning, or error. Each single type has its own icon. If it's like a issue or an error that happens and you want to notify the user, you use the error icon. Otherwise, either warning or info would be appropriate.